Hey folks, it's Greg Kuhn with Fighting for Fitness. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about intermittent fasting. If I had to just pick one tool for how I choose to eat and control my weight and get proper nutrition, it'd be intermittent fasting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First, let's define what is intermittent fasting. I think the easiest way to explain that are distinct periods of time where you're eating or allowed to eat, and then distinct periods of time where you go without eating anything at all. For the purposes of this conversation, we're going to define our fasting period as a time when we're only consuming things like water or coffee or tea, no sugars, no snacks, no carbohydrates, no supplements of any kind. Maybe you could take vitamins or something along those lines. Personally, I don't like to take vitamins on an empty stomach. So again, in the context when I'm talking about fasting, you're drinking water, coffee, tea. I'm not talking about doing bulletproof coffees if you're familiar with what that is. Bulletproof coffee is where you add some fat of some type into your coffee in the morning. Fairly popular for people that are into the keto diet. Some of the different protocols or programs that people use when they're doing intermittent fasting, and it's for periods longer than just skipping from. Well, I typically go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. I'll eat dinner at 6 o'clock. I get up in the morning at 8 a.m. and I have breakfast. Now, some people will say that period of time in between when you had dinner and you got up in the morning, that was your fasting period. Well, in fact, the definition of breakfast, when you break that down, break fast, so I get it. However, I'm going to argue that for most people, and it depends on how you're eating and what your metabolism is and all of those kind of things, that you're really not going to get the benefits of fasting until you reach about 16 hours. Now, if you're eating really lean and really clean and you're doing lots of exercise, one could argue that maybe you start dipping into the benefits of fasting at around even as early as 8 hours. But most people say it's around 12 hours. And typically everyone agrees that once you've hit about 16 hours of going without any food, then you're going to start reaping some of the benefits. What happens is the longer you go without food, the more benefits that you start to accumulate. So I look at it for a couple different reasons. What I want to do is I want to preserve my muscle mass. And one of the nice things about intermittent fasting, contrary to what we believed in the past, is fasting actually preserves muscle. Because as we go for periods without eating, our body recognizes that and it kicks in and it produces human growth hormone, HGH. Which makes sense because if you go back, even if you go back several hundred years, or even look in some cultures even today, and we think of humans as a species, if we had to go for extended periods of time without food, maybe we were out hunting and we couldn't get any food. Well, if every time we went without food, we started to waste our muscle away, but every time we ate, we gained fat, eventually we would get so weak and so fat that we wouldn't be able to survive to go out to hunt or gather or do whatever it is that we were doing. So it makes sense biologically that if I go without eating for certain periods of time, then my body would tap into its fat reserves, preserve the muscle, and in fact even give me some greater mental acuity so that I would be better at my hunting or my gathering or whatever it is that I'm doing. So biologically, fasting actually makes sense. When you get to the earlier phases or the shorter time windows of going without food, say around 16 hours, one of the things that that's going to do is just by the very nature of going for those periods without food, it's going to help me keep my calorie intake in check. And as I mentioned in my other video, if you watch my first video that I put out, I started to bump into different philosophies on the whole calories in, calorie out. And I personally am a believer that no matter what, calories still matter. You've got to eat enough calories in order to maintain your body in the physical state that you like it. If you're big and strong and muscular, if you stop eating entirely, you're not going to be big and strong and muscular and powerful anymore. If you want to be big and strong and muscular and lean, but you eat way too many calories, and I don't care where they come from, eventually you're going to start getting a little soft around the middle. Now, different foods are going to change the rate at which you put that weight on. And based, again, on the research that I have found, proteins And fats, if we exclude the carbohydrates, don't bump our insulin levels up. And I think of insulin as kind of a gatekeeper to our fat storage. So if you think about when you eat carbohydrates, so you think of carbohydrates, if you don't know what those are, that's sugar specifically, or breads, or grains, or fruits. And there's carbohydrates in vegetables as well, but not nearly as many, and they're offset by the fiber. So when I eat a carbohydrate, that's gonna stimulate my body to release a hormone called insulin, and insulin breaks that sugar down in my bloodstream in a way that the cells can actually utilize it. But the other thing that does for my body is that says, hey, great, we've got lots of fuel here. Let's open up the gateways and allow our bodies in order to store that up in case someday down the road we don't have that food available. So when we bump our insulin up, typically we bump our fat storage up. If you just think high insulin, then we've got high fat storage. Low insulin means that we have the ability to start pulling the fat out of our body, because that's how our body were designed to operate. Hey, there's no food. Don't worry, we've got some fat stored around, maybe around our middle, or on, in my case, on my love handles, or I don't really have any fat on my legs. I got skinny little chicken legs. Your body's going to dip into those fat reserves and use those as fuel prior to attacking the muscle, because it actually takes more energy for your body to attack that muscle and break that down. Plus, it's just not good biology. So again, getting back to our fasting windows, we can do a 16-hour fast. And I'll tell you, when we get to the end of the video, I'll tell you exactly what my protocol looks like and how I do this. But I'll go over some of the different protocols. So I could go a 16-8, so 16 hours of not eating with 8 hours of eating. Another real popular one is a 20 and 4, which I think is even better. It's even more beneficial if you can pull that off, to go 20 hours. And I'll get there sometimes, but that one's a little bit more challenging for me, as it will be for you. So go 20 hours without eating, and then you got a 4-hour window for eating. And I think all things considered, that may be the absolute best protocol for most people if you can get there. And so you'd have 2 meals separated by roughly 4 hours. That's going to keep your blood sugar really, really super low. You're going to start getting into some of the other benefits where your body starts to transition into a little bit of ketosis, which is really beneficial for your brain function, for your mental clarity. The other thing too is that when you're going those periods of time without food, you don't get the afternoon drags. Because let's think about it, most of the time when you eat lunch, especially if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, you feel pretty good for a bit, and then shortly after that, man, you're heading over to the latte machine to get another cup of coffee or something to keep you going. So coming back to our protocol, 16-8, 20 and 4, or we can do some other protocols where we're fasting for 24 hours at a time, or even longer. And what I recommend is, if you want to start getting into extended fasting, make your maximum goal around 72 hours. When we start getting up into those 20, 24, 48, 72 hours, we start dipping into some other things, such as a system called autophagy. Autophagy is really fascinating. Your body actually realizes, man, we don't have any food. We haven't had any for a while. We're dipping into the fat reserves, but we still need some other nutrients here on board. And so what it'll do is it'll start going intracellular and start looking, hey, what cells are not healthy, or what cells are not functioning well, and it'll actually start to attack those cells, similar in fashion to how your immune system will attack some foreign bodies in your body in order to fight off, say, infection or what have you. But through autophagy, you're basically cleaning house. So you're going through all of the damaged, dysfunctional, tired, weary cells, and your body will actually consume those and recycle them. So for all of my friends that are into recycling, you can do that in your own body. If you go for periods of time, I'd say getting close to 20, 24 hours and even longer, you're really maximizing that autophagy. There's great benefits towards anti-aging when you start going into those protocols. Studies have shown a long time ago that some folks that do a calorie reduction, they can stave off aging, but there's some also just with specific calorie reduction. Most people that are on a reduced calorie diet for a sustained period of time, their bodies look a little bit like long distance runners, although maybe they're not as fit. And if that's the body type that you're looking for, and you're okay with just not eating very much, maybe dropping to a 1,500, 1,200 calorie, maybe for the ladies, calories a day, which is about half of what most people eat, then you're probably going to get some benefits in longevity for your lifestyle. But they've also found that possibly eating regular one day and then going with no food the next day, that can be beneficial as well. Now for myself, I'm an athlete. And so eating one day and then not eating the next day, that's not going to benefit me athletically nearly as much as some of the other protocols, which again is where that 16-8 works really, really well. I'm still able to maintain a high performance athletically, and I'm also able to keep my body fat down, regulate my blood sugar, maybe bump into a little bit of that autophagy and some other things. The reason that I prefer intermittent fasting over all the other options and protocols, it's less that I have to do rather than more. So I don't have to meal prep and do a whole bunch of other things like that. I don't have to be real selective on my food. So specifically, the way that I do intermittent fasting, I have my first meal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now mine's all weighted towards later in the day because, again, I like to eat late in the day. I think eating earlier in the day is preferable, but I'm telling you how I do mine and why I like it. So I don't have to be as disciplined when I'm eating. I can eat within my eating window. I can essentially eat anything that I want, any types of food. I don't have to be as specific. Now, I can't eat an excessive volume of food. So again, and I know this is controversial, but I still try to stay somewhere around 2,000, 2,500, maybe as much as 3,000 calories a day. But I don't count calories. I don't think that counting calories is essential. However, I've been counting calories to some degree since I was in high school because I did pay attention to my caloric intake and I've paid attention to my caloric outgo. So I kind of have a ballpark. It'd be like knowing how much money you have in the checkbook, but you never really sat down and reconciled your checkbook. You know how much is coming in, you know how much is going out, so you have a pretty good idea of where you're at. That's how I do my calorie counting. I have gone through different phases where I've used tracking apps and stuff to sort of help me get calibrated, but that's where I'm at. So getting back to where I was going, I start my first meal of the day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will typically, that's going to be my breakfast. And that can be whatever meal that I want, depending if I'm home or if I'm at work. A lot of times I'll just get a double meat salad from Subway, and that's my first meal of the day. Then I'll eat somewhere around 6 o'clock is my second meal of the day, and then I have kind of a snack before bed that I consider my third meal of the day, something a little bit lighter. So I have two main meals a day and then plus a snack, and I try to cut off my eating at 10 o'clock at night. Now for most people that would be way too late in the day, and I don't think it's ideal, but I just sleep better with a little something in my stomach. I don't like to go to bed hungry, and so it's not necessarily preferred, but that's what works for me. So folks, remember, if you got questions or comments, maybe there's something that I said that you didn't necessarily agree with or didn't understand, by all means, reach out, let me know, leave comments below, and remember, get rid of those excuses. You're not too old, it's not too late. Get after it. Woo! I gotta get in shape.